In the book of Acts, those languages which were spoken by the apostles, maybe a few more, but certainly the apostles, were recognizable human languages. How do I know that? Because they were understood by 18 different people groups. So those were real languages. The idea that you can speak in tongues, meaning you can utter nonsense syllables, is simply wrong. So if somebody claims the gift of speaking in tongues, you would simply invite them to demonstrate and test their own gift. What evidence do they have that what they're doing when they speak in tongues is real language? And they might try to shift and say, well, it's the language of angels. Yes, but even the language of angels has structure. All language must have structure. But what has been found when they took tape recorders across the world to examine this issue was that most people were simply using the syllables of their own native language in various disconnected ways. It wasn't language at all. But the idea that it was is very appealing because it makes you feel, oh, I'm really close to God now. Yes, that's fine, but you better be sure you test your tongue, and you can test it in this way. Paul says in that one chapter, 1 Corinthians 14, what's the point of tongues? He asks that question. Let's think about the point of it. It's a sign to unbelievers. What? That's rather interesting. A sign is an unmistakable, irrefutable miracle. So if you are speaking in tongues only in your closet, never in public, tell me, how is that a sign and a miracle to anybody? The other text that's interesting is 1 Corinthians 14:13, where Paul says, let the one who has this gift of languages, I'd translate glossa there as language. If you're one that has it, and Paul carefully says, not everybody has the same gifts, that's quite clear. But if you're one who thinks he has this gift of glossa, of languages, that person is to pray to interpret that tongue, that language, so that others may hear what God is saying to you. That's very significant. So test yourself on that. Do you ever do that? If you claim to have the gift of language, are you praying to be a self-interpreting tongue speaker to others? Now, you can have the companion gift of interpretation. That's also possible. But in that particular verse, 1 Corinthians 14:13, Paul speaks of self-interpretation. But the point is, as the Hastings Bible Dictionary says, well, Paul is not any friend of unintelligibility. Brilliant. He wants you to be sure that what you're speaking is a real, intelligible language. And we want to know what God is saying through you.
Well, how does that work with self-interpretation, though? So if someone starts speaking a foreign language, which to the non-speaker sounds like babble, and then they interpret what sounds to you like babble, how do you know it's genuine, it's legit?
You'll have to ask Paul that question. That's what he clearly says. You can have self-interpretation. You can also have a companion gift that somebody else has where they interpret for you. But you might ask the same question. How do you know that if somebody else interprets, it's true? Only because you have faith in that gift. You've proven it to be the real gift. So you then have to have faith in what Paul says, that the genuine thing is to be interpreted by the speaker himself, and it must be intelligible. So it's largely to do with one's whole approach to faith in Paul, faith in the scriptures.
And also putting things to test. I mean, you got to test all things. So whatever the interpreter, whether the self-interpreter or another one says, you have to test it with the rest of scripture.
But at least you would find out that it is a real language if somebody's interpreting it for you. At least in the case of somebody else interpreting it, but you'll still find questions there, and the element of faith and belief will still step in. My impression is that it's all too easy to misconceive this whole gift. It's all too easy to imagine that one is speaking supernatural language, angelic or otherwise, when that may just be a sort of self-encouraging thing. You may just not be saying other than a series of unintelligible syllables which sound like your native tongue. You may never have established that it's a real language. So I've said to people, all right, if you now speak to me in German, which I happen to know, let's assume the person I'm talking to doesn't know German. If you now speak to me in German, supernaturally, not having learned the language, I'll believe it as a miracle. And that usually makes them not do anything. So test all things carefully and use your intelligence to discern the true from the false.